it's all about focus. I don't care who you are, where you're from, doesn't matter. It's having a focus and having a purpose. You wake up every single day to get better today than you were yesterday. It doesn't matter what you are. You're a basketball player, a hockey player, golf player, painter, right? It doesn't matter. Right? You try to reach your full potential by getting better every single day, and that's the quest.
Kobe Bryant on the Mamba mentality. That was the question. We were talking about alliteration at the top of the show, and that alliteration was a stroke of genius on his part. Tom Thibodeau got to know Kobe Bryant as a player a long, long time ago. Before Kobe had a chance, we think, to label anything, before he had even scored for the first time in the NBA. At the time, Tom was an assistant coach with the Philadelphia 76ers, and Kobe was a teenage kid in Philadelphia. And Tom is kind enough to join us today on a tough day on the Whiting Clinic LASIK and Cataract Hotline. Tibbs, it's good to hear your voice. Unfortunate it's under these circumstances, but I appreciate you giving us a couple minutes this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And you're right. It's really difficult circumstances, and he was just such an incredible guy that it's sad. It's really sad.
So set up a picture for us of the circumstances in which you found yourself as an assistant working out Kobe, how that came about, and what were your impressions, what that was like at the time.
Yeah, and you're going back almost 30 years ago, and it was a far different NBA. And I was with the Sixers, and we were practicing at St. Joe's. Very few teams had practice facilities at that time.
Right.
And so, and Kobe was a high school player, and I had never seen a high school player like Kobe. And so whenever he would have a day off from school, he would come over to St. Joe's. He'd be the first one in the gym. He'd want you to work him out. Then he would wait for players to trickle in, and then he would pick their brains about, all aspects of the game, whether it be shooting or defense or how they saw the game or, playoff games, their transition going from college to the pros. And all along he had this plan to go from high school to the pros, and he obviously didn't share that with us, but that's what he was planning. And he was a methodical planner, but just the way he worked, and he'd stay there before practice, watch practice. He would lift weights. He'd wait after to try to play players one-on-one, pick everyone's brain, whether it was a coach, a player. It didn't matter. But it was very unusual for a high school player to approach it that way. And the thing that was even more unusual is when he would play, and sometimes they'd be 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 in some one-on-one, games. The thing that stood out, and he was going against players that were much older and much stronger, but he held his own, which I thought was very unusual. And as I got to know him, and it's easy to see the talent when you watch him play, and you look back at his career and all the great things that he achieved. That part was easy, but once you got to know him as a person and how special a person he was a very caring guy. He had a great sense of humor. And I watched him through three different stages: the high school stage, then his playing career, then his post-playing career. And we were just texting last week. We were making plans to get together when I go out to L.A. In the next couple of weeks. But he was a doting father. That's what we were communicating about. He was coaching his daughter's team. He was asking coaching questions and things that he wanted to do, with his team. And so, I think that part of him, like who he was off the floor, and I was concerned, when he got done playing about his transition into the next phase. Although in thinking back now, I shouldn't have been, because he always had a plan with everything that he was, doing. And he always worked his plan. And I think a lot of it was mirrored after Michael Jordan.
Yep.
His post-playing career was amazing. I believe last February, he asked me to meet him at the NBA store where he was promoting his book. And it was fascinating because he was so at peace with where he was in the next phase of his life. And again, the same thing, he was talking about coaching his daughter's teams. He was talking about his book, and it was going to become a series of books. But the best part of it was the way he interacted with the kids that were there.
Tibbs,
he was signing their books and he was in conversations with them. But he was just an amazing guy. And I think back, from the early stages when he was, just starting out, and he told me that when he was living overseas, his dad played in Europe for several years. He studied Jordan, and he had people from the States sending him film of Michael Jordan, and it was funny because he would mirror and mimic all his moves, and he had them down to a T, from the fadeaway to the second bounce, to squaring up, his body balance. But there was a much deeper understanding, which I thought was very unusual, particularly for a high school player. He understood the importance of having fundamentals mastered, and he thought that Michael exemplified that.
He understood. Here's what's interesting, Tibbs. Let me stop you here, because in effect, what you're telling us is, even if he hadn't named it the Mamba mentality yet, that's already what he revealed to you or showed to you in terms of his level of his depth of interest and commitment to what he wanted to become, even when he's a teenager.
Yeah, no, there's no question, and I think that's what made him special. I think, there's a lot of players, or not a lot, that have that. They're in that, top 1% and have that superstar ability. But when you combine that with the drive, determination, the persistence, unbelievable will to win. But he wanted to know, like, deeper things, like what wins in the playoffs. Like, he understood how important it was to be able to think on your feet and to understand, you have to have your fundamentals mastered. When someone takes something away from you, what is your counter? And I think he was always preparing for that. And then to watch, like, his career going from high school to the pros, which was an incredible jump at the time.
Sure.
And then to have, the early success that he did, but struggle some in the playoffs, and then to get to the point where he gets to the mountaintop. And then, of course, I had the good fortune of coaching against him in the finals, and there's probably nothing better than a Celtic-Laker final. And we did that in 2008 and in 2010. And, all throughout his career, he never changed. Whenever, we would see each other, he'd make it a point to come over and talk. And obviously later on, he would needle me some about 2010, and I would needle him about 2008. And when you coached against him, he put fear into you in terms of there was just so many ways that he could beat you, and that was Jordan-like.
Yep.
There was, he could beat in transition. He could beat you with a pick and roll. He could beat you with with a mid post up. He could beat you with, being at the elbow. He was great moving without the ball. He'd set up back cuts. He'd get lobs. His ability to get to the free throw line. And when I think back to Game 7, we had the lead in 2010 going into the fourth quarter, and he didn't shoot the ball particularly well in that game.
That's right.
6 for 24. But he played a great, great game, and his rebounding was probably the difference in the game. He was still the leading scorer. He got to the free throw line 15 times. But the rebounding, I think he had 15 rebounds in that game, and that was the difference in the game. The rebounding is what won it for them. And then, later on, obviously, when his post-playing career, and just to see all the great things that he was doing, and it was amazing to win an Oscar. But he was completely at peace with being done playing. I think he knew there was nothing left to give. He gave it all.
Tom Thibodeau is our guest in the Fan. And, you've been around players enough to know, especially sometimes the best ones, that second act ain't that easy sometimes. And it did seem as if he'd figured something out about what his track was going to be. And as you say, you've been around him. And he seemed very much at peace with it, which doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen that way, especially with superstar players.
No, Dan, and you're right. You're hitting on something that I think he had a master plan for. I know towards the end of his career, he was mentoring a lot of players in the league, but you could see, and I saw it that night when he was promoting the book, and then the movie that he put together, the short movie, and winning that Oscar. I think there was a concentrated effort to connect with the next generation. and it was younger kids, and then he had built his academy. And it wasn't just here; it was all over the world. And he wanted to connect with people, and that's what made him so special. And so, whenever you would see him, he was inspiring. He was generous and kind with his time. He was all the things that you look for in a person.
Former NBA head coach Tom Thibodeau, former Wolves coach Tom Thibodeau, kind enough to join us this afternoon. Mitch Lawrence at 4:30, Sam Mitchell at 5:30. I don't know how good your memory will serve you, but if you go back to the year he was drafted, of course, he was taken with the 13th pick by Charlotte and then immediately traded. And there were a million conspiracy theories at the time that this was all very much orchestrated. Jerry West was behind the scenes pushing some buttons to make sure he could get him there, and that maybe even Kobe, through his people, had tried to make it clear there's some places we don't want to go. I don't know how much of that you remember, but I'm curious to get your view on it, because if you're taken 13th, then, it's easy to say today, well, that's absurd, right? No matter even if he was 12 years old. I mean, given what we know, what he is, how does he fall to 13th? So it begs the question, as much time as you spent around him, did you see, and were there many people who saw this level of superstardom for him that he ended up being? How does he end up falling to 13?
That's a great question. I guess you could probably compare it some to Kevin Garnett in Minnesota. And it just was unusual to have high school players, coming in like that. And you're right. I think people probably had questions, but the thing that I remember about him, and I think he benefited from his dad playing in the NBA and playing in a city like Philly. And I believe Arn Tellem was his agent at the time. But I knew that he wanted a major market right from the beginning. So it sort of told you a lot about his mindset. He wanted the big stage. I know he talked about New York, LA, and Chicago. And that was a big part of his plan. And as I said, he had the whole thing mapped out. And that says a lot for a high school kid. And he was able to pull it off. And, and credit to Jerry West, great eye for talent. And the rest is history. It's 20 years of, great basketball out in LA. And he was the driving force behind it. And he wasn't only great. I think that the thing that sometimes gets lost is, what he did for his teammates. He made his team great every night. If Kobe was on the floor, you had a chance to win.
In your experience, it's the age-old question about there are guys we watch who are obviously very talented and very fundamentally sound. That's probably the most underrated thing about Michael, most underrated thing about Kobe, in it how hard they work to be really unbelievably fundamentally sound players to add to that great God-given talent. But it's the killer in them, and when I say killer, I mean killer instinct. I mean the ability to, well, not ability, just the propensity to say, I'm going to take your basketball life away from you because that's what I do. That's what, in part, I'm put on this earth to do. Do you believe that's something somebody either has or doesn't, that it's not something that any coach or any amount of time that can come out in someone, that it's either in you or it isn't? What do you make of that part of really the Kobe legacy? You could say the Michael legacy as well.
Well, I think you're hitting on something. I think, and it's one of the reasons why I think people respected him so much. And the same thing with Jordan. And, you look at Kevin Garnett, those type of guys always impose their will. And I think it is in them, and Parcells had that old adage about if they don't bite his puppies, they're not going to bite.
Yeah.
And, and those guys they did it right from the beginning. And I think to win in the NBA is very difficult. And I think when you have that type of leadership, that it's inspiring to their teammates. And I think the best leadership that you can get is when you have a guy, and we had that with Ewing in New York, and we were fortunate in Boston with Kevin.
Yep.
That type of leadership, when players come in the gym and they see a guy working like that, that's inspiring to them. And then it also gives them a lot of confidence in games. you feel like, oh, they won't let us lose. They'll do whatever is necessary to win in the end. So I think their makeup is a big part of it. But I think when you look at how players view each other and the great respect that a guy like Kobe had throughout the league and continues to have, and it'll be forever. I think his legacy is, it's worldwide, and it's about how he competed and, all the things that he did for his team to win 5 championships. It's an unbelievable accomplishment. And, you felt the same way. I know, like when you're sitting there and you're getting ready to play against him or coach against him, you're up all night thinking about all the possibilities that can happen. And I think his ability to think on his feet, he's a very, very bright player. If something worked in one particular game, it probably wasn't going to work in the next one because he was such a student of the game too. He would, after every game, he would take the film home and he'd analyze what happened, what worked, what didn't work. So you had to be ready for that. I know we constantly had to change our schemes against him because, he was great at reading it. And, he studied Michael. He knew how to get away from double teams late in games. So you had to adjust. You had to have different times that you would go. So you sort of could get him to read what you were doing. But he was very difficult to guard because he was so strong in so many different areas of the game.
Did you ever have a specific or an unusual moment with him on the court?
No, he'd always give me like this little nod before we played.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was like his way of saying it's on, which I knew he didn't have to do that, but and you knew you had to go for 48 minutes to beat him.
Yeah.
And there was never any quit in him. And he believed, he could overcome, any adversity in the game, any deficit, lead was safe. No matter, and it's funny, I was talking to Doc and we were talking about 2008, we had the 42-point lead and he was still nervous because Kobe was on the floor. It was the fourth, and that's what he did to coaches, and you felt it.
That's the ultimate compliment for sure. Tom, how did you find out yesterday?
I saw someone called me and said they just saw something. It was total disbelief. It was one of those things that you don't want to believe. It stops you dead in your tracks. It was devastating. You're hoping it's just not true, that it was a mistake. And your heart goes out to his family, the Laker family, NBA family, and also to the families of all of those, the other families that lost loved ones as well. It was such a tragic day, tragic accident. It was a horrible, horrible day.
Tibbs, it's unfortunate that this is the way we're chatting for the first time in a while, but I do appreciate you giving us time, and I'm hoping maybe the next time we chat, we can talk about other things like what you're up to these days, how hungry you might be to get back in it, sort of bring people up to date on that as well. Can we try to do that down the road?
Oh, for sure. And thanks for having me on, and thanks for talking about Kobe.
Thanks, Tibbs. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's Tom Thibodeau, former NBA head coach, former Minnesota Timberwolves head coach as well. And I know there are people out there who want me to do what happened here, and are you sorry about this move and you're sorry about that? Those are legit questions. They're fair questions. We've actually talked to Tibbs towards the end of his tenure here about some of that stuff as well. He'll answer pretty much anything. I just didn't think today, for me, wasn't going to be the day where I want to try to separate the interview into two completely different components after the day after the NBA tragedy that was announced and revealed yesterday afternoon. We'll come back with Johnny Athletic. We'll get his view on this and some other matters. As I mentioned, Mitch Lawrence will join at 4:30. Sam Mitchell, 5:30. We taped the interview with Sam because he's doing some NBA TV duty while we're on the air. You're not going to want to miss that interview.